Now, before you start judging anyone, because I know you most likely will, let me paint you a picture. Because this isn't the kind of story that starts with a fight or a suspicious text message or perfume that isn't hers on a collar that is his. No, the story starts on a Tuesday, a completely ordinary, almost aggressively boring Tuesday. And it ends with me shaking hands with a man who has been sleeping, metaphorically I hope, in my marriage for 2 years. But we'll get there. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're gonna love it here. My name is Martins Calloway. I'm 39 years old. I drive a slightly dented Ford F-150 that I keep promising to fix. And I am, or at least I was before Tuesday, a happily married man. My wife, Rebecca Calloway, is the CEO of Calloway Vance Capital, a mid-sized investment firm in downtown Chicago that she built from a pitch deck and sheer terrifying willpower. I say terrifying because I've seen her in a boardroom. The woman doesn't blink. She just stares at you until your soul quietly excuses itself and leaves the building. I love her deeply, embarrassingly, which is exactly why on that particular Tuesday, I decided to surprise her at work with lunch. Thai food. Her favorite pad thai with extra peanuts, because I know my wife. I know her coffee order, her shoe size, the face she makes when she's pretending to listen but is actually mentally redecorating the living room. I know this woman, or so I thought. The lobby of Calloway Vance Capital is the kind of place that makes you instinctively straighten your collar. High ceilings, marble floors, a front desk that looks like it costs more than my truck, and the repairs I've been avoiding. There's always soft jazz playing that nobody asked for, but somehow everyone tolerates. Classic rich people music. Nobody's happy, but everybody's calm. The security guard at the front, a broad-shouldered guy with a jaw like a kitchen counter, and a name tag that read Dennis, held up one hand as I approached. "Sir," Dennis said, looking at me the way you look at someone who has wandered into the wrong neighborhood. "Do you have an appointment?" I told him, smiling, holding up the bag of Thai food like it was a peace offering. "I'm here to see Rebecca Calloway. I'm her husband." There was a pause. Not a normal pause. Not the kind where someone is checking a list or reaching for a phone. This was the kind of pause that has weight to it. The kind of pause that if you paid close attention, you could hear the precise moment a man decided whether or not to laugh in your face. Dennis laughed in my face. Not loudly. He was professional enough to keep it to a low rumble, but his shoulders shook, his eyes crinkled, and he pressed his lips together the way people do when they're trying very hard not to let the whole thing out. He looked at me, then he looked past me at the elevator bank behind me. Then he looked back at me with the expression of a man who has just been handed the punchline before the joke. "Sir," he said, his voice steady, but betraying just a flicker of amusement, "I see Mrs. Calloway's husband every single day." He nodded slowly, deliberately, the way people do when they want you to really absorb the information, as a matter of fact. And then he pointed right over my shoulder. "There he is, coming out right now." I turned around. And I want you to understand something. In that moment, every logical explanation a reasonable human brain could produce. Doppelganger, twins, elaborate prank, bad Thai food hallucination before I'd even eaten the Thai food. Every single one of them fired at once, and none of them stuck, because the man walking out of that elevator was not me. He was not even close to me. He was taller, broader, with dark hair graying at the temples, and the kind of confident, long-legged stride that says I own something important. He was wearing a suit that had probably been measured, cut, and stitched specifically around his body by someone in Milan. He was carrying a leather portfolio and talking into a Bluetooth earpiece, and he looked, God help me, like the kind of man a CEO would marry. Meanwhile, I was standing there in dark jeans and a jacket, holding a plastic bag of Thai food, slowly becoming aware that I had a small stain on my sleeve that I was fairly certain was mustard from the sandwich I'd had for breakfast. We made eye contact. He ended his call, and something moved across his face. Not recognition, not confusion. Something careful, measured, like a man who had been trained to react to surprises without showing that he was reacting to surprises. He slowed his walk just slightly, and that's when I knew. I didn't know what I knew, but I knew something. And then, because apparently I have a self-preservation instinct roughly equivalent to that of a golden retriever, I decided to play along. "Hey," I said, extending my hand, smiling like I wasn't internally screaming. Good to finally put a face to the name. He looked at my hand, then at me, then he shook it firm once. "Likewise," he said, his voice low and even, and then quieter, close enough that Dennis couldn't hear. He said 4 words that rearranged every single thing I thought I understood about my life. "We need to talk now." A smart man would have said, "Absolutely not." Handed him the pad, tied out of spite, and called his wife on the spot. A wise man would have walked straight to his dented Ford F-150 and driven somewhere quiet to have a small, dignified breakdown. I followed him to the coffee shop across the street. I know, but here is the thing about moments like this. Moments where reality cracks just slightly down the middle, and you can see something strange flickering behind it. You don't walk away. You can't. Every rational part of your brain is screaming, "Leave," and every other part of you, the curious part, the stubborn part, the part that always needs to know how the movie ends, is already pulling up a chair. His name, he told me, was Special Agent Daniel Rohr, FBI, Financial Crimes Division. He slid a badge across the coffee shop table like it was the most casual thing in the world, and I stared at it for probably 10 seconds longer than necessary. "Yes, and you've been pretending to be my wife's husband for 22 months. I laughed. I don't know why. It wasn't funny, not even a little, but the laugh just came out of me, hollow and slightly unhinged. The way laughs do when your brain simply cannot locate any other appropriate response. 22 months, I repeated. "Yes, we've been married for 6 years," I said. "Rebecca and I." He nodded slowly, and something in his expression shifted. Not sympathy exactly, but something adjacent to it. Respectful. Almost like a man acknowledging the weight of something he'd been carrying on behalf of someone else. "Mr. Calloway," he said, wrapping both hands around his coffee cup, and leaning forward just slightly, "your wife is not who you think she is." And there it was. The line, the one you hear in movies and think, nobody actually says that in real life, except someone just said it to me in a coffee shop on a Tuesday, across the street from the building with my wife's name on it, while my pad thai slowly went cold in a bag on the seat beside me. I looked at him, steady, calm, completely not calm. Then I said, "I think you'd better start talking." And what he pulled out? That's when everything I thought I knew about Rebecca Calloway, her past, her company, and the life we'd built together, began to unravel. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you genuinely. He pulled out a photograph. Not a document, not a case file, not some official FBI exhibit with a stamp and a reference number. A photograph printed on plain paper, slightly creased down the middle like it had been folded and unfolded too many times by someone who kept coming back to it. He slid it across the table without a word. I looked down. It was Rebecca, my Rebecca. Same sharp jawline, same dark hair she always kept pulled back when she was working. Same posture, straight, deliberate, like she'd been built by someone who didn't believe in wasted angles. But she was standing in what looked like a parking garage, and she was handing a manila envelope to a man I had never seen before in my life. The timestamp in the corner read, 18 months ago, a Thursday. I checked mentally, the way you do when you're trying to anchor yourself to something real. 18 months ago on a Thursday, I had been at home, repainting the kitchen. Rebecca had told me she had a conference in Boston. She had never been to Boston. "Who is the man she's with?" I asked. My voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. "His name is Victor Hale," Agent Rohr said, watching me the way doctors watch patients when they're delivering results, carefully measuring how much you can absorb before something breaks. He runs a network, shell companies, ghost investors, fraudulent capital transfers. On paper, he's a consultant. In practice, he's been laundering money through mid-sized investment firms across the Midwest for the last 4 years. I sat back, and Rebecca's firm is one of them. It wasn't a question the way he'd said it, the way he was still watching me. It wasn't a question. Callaway Vance Capital has processed approximately $47 million in fraudulent transfers over the past 2 years. He said just like that, 47 million, like he was reading off a grocery list. I picked up my coffee, put it back down, picked it up again. I needed something to do with my hands, because the alternative was flipping the table, and I was in public, and I still had some dignity left. Not much, but some. My wife, I said slowly, is laundering money. We believe she is facilitating it. Yes. You believe we're building the case for 22 months. Financial crimes are layered, Mr. Callaway. You don't just pull a thread and the whole thing comes apart. You have to. I understand how investigations work, I said, sharper than I intended. He stopped, gave me the silence, and I appreciated it actually, because I needed exactly 4 seconds to feel what I was feeling before I locked it somewhere deep and practical and got back to the conversation. I leaned forward. Why are you telling me this? I said. Because I walked in off the street with lunch. You don't blow a 22-month cover operation because a man showed up with Thai food. So why am I sitting here? And for the first time since we'd sat down, something moved in his expression that wasn't controlled. Something that might have been, if I was reading it right, relief. Because he said, we've hit a wall. He talked for 40 minutes. I'll give you the version that doesn't require a whiteboard and 3 different colored markers. But understand, what he laid out was not simple. Victor Hale was careful. Surgically careful. Every transaction that moved through Callaway Vance was clean on the surface. Structured to look like legitimate investor activity. The kind of thing that takes a forensic accountant 6 months just to begin to understand. They had the transfers, they had the pattern. What they didn't have, what they'd been trying to get for the better part of a year, was the internal authorization trail. The documented proof that someone inside the firm had knowingly approved these transactions. That someone, he believed, was Rebecca. But Rebecca had not left a single fingerprint. Every approval that mattered had been routed through a secondary authorization system that existed technically under the signature of Callaway Vance's chief financial officer, a man named Greg Sutton, who 3 months ago had suffered a very convenient heart attack and died before the FBI could bring him in for questioning. Convenient, I said flatly. Very, Roar agreed, and the way he said it told me he didn't think it was an accident either. And without Sutton, every trail we have stops at a dead man's desk. I was quiet for a moment. Outside the coffee shop window, Chicago moved the way Chicago always moves, loudly, indifferently, completely unaware that a man sitting 3 feet from the window was in the process of having his entire life reassembled into a shape he didn't recognize. You said you've hit a wall, I said. What does that have to do with me? He reached back into the portfolio. This time, he pulled out a single sheet of paper, not a photograph, a document, and laid it on the table facing me. I read it, then I read it again. This is a wire transfer record, I said. Yes, with my name on it, yes. The number on the document was $420,000. The account it had been transferred to was registered under a holding company. The account it had been transferred from was mine, my personal savings account, the one Rebecca had helped me set up when we consolidated our finances 2 years into the marriage. The one I checked maybe 3 times a year because I am apparently the world's most trusting idiot. This transfer was made 14 months ago, Roar said quietly. From your account, you didn't make it. No, I said, I did not. We know that. Do you? My voice had gone flat, the kind of flat that isn't calm. It's the surface of something that is the opposite of calm, smoothed over just enough to function. Because from where I'm sitting, that document looks like it could very easily be used to suggest that I'm part of this. He didn't deny it, and that the fact that he sat there and did not deny it told me more than anything else he'd said in the last 40 minutes. Someone set me up, I said. Someone created a contingency, he said carefully. Something that could be used if necessary to redirect attention to me. To you. I laughed again, that same hollow, slightly unhinged laugh from earlier. Because what else do you do? My wife, the woman I had driven across town to bring Thai food to, the woman whose coffee order I knew by heart, the woman I had watched build something extraordinary from nothing, and felt nothing but pride watching her do it. My wife had built a trapdoor into our marriage, and I had been standing on it for 14 months. Without ever once looking down. What do you need from me? I asked. There's a server room on the 14th floor of Callaway Vance. The authorization records we need, The real ones. The ones that weren't routed through Sutton. We believe they're on a private internal drive that's never been connected to the external network. That's why we can't pull them remotely. Someone has to physically access the terminal. And you can't get a warrant, because the moment we move officially, the drive gets wiped. We've seen it happen twice already on related cases. These people have people inside. Mr. Calloway, we move with paper. The evidence disappears before the ink dries. I stared at him. So you need me to walk into my wife's building? I said, go up to the 14th floor, access a secure server terminal, and pull files for the FBI. In essence, without her knowing. That would be ideal, yes, and if she finds out, he said, which was not an answer to the question I asked, and we both knew it. I looked out the window again. A woman was walking past with a stroller, laughing at something on her phone. A cab nearly clipped a cyclist. A food truck was doing absolutely nothing wrong, and probably having a great Tuesday. Everyone out there living their uncomplicated, non-FBI entangled lives. Must be nice. I need to know one thing, I said, turning back to him. And I need you to answer me straight. I'll try. I asked about the account, about the transfer. Did she do that knowing it would land on me? Or was I stopped, searched for the word collateral. He held my gaze, and in the space between my question and his answer, I understood that whatever he said next was going to determine not just what I did in the next 48 hours, but what I did with the rest of my life. The transfer, he said carefully, was initiated from a device registered to her personal profile. She would have needed her biometrics to authorize it. The table was very still. My hands were very still. Everything was very, very still. Okay, I said. I reached over, picked up the pad thai, set it in front of him. I'm not hungry anymore, I said. Tell me exactly what you need me to do. And just like that, with cold Thai food and a decision I couldn't take back, I stopped being a husband trying to surprise his wife. I became the one thing Victor Hale and Rebecca Calloway hadn't planned for, a variable. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. So thank you for real. Rohr gave me 24 hours, not because 24 hours was ideal, not because the FBI had run the numbers and determined that was the optimal window. He gave me 24 hours because that was how long Rebecca would be out of the building. She had a quarterly review dinner that evening with her board, followed by what her assistant, who Rohr had apparently been quietly cultivating as a source for the better part of 6 months, God bless her, had confirmed was an overnight stay at the Langham Hotel with 2 of her senior partners. 1 night, 1 window. You'll have a comms piece in your left ear, Rohr told me, sliding a small case across the coffee shop table, like we were in a movie neither of us had auditioned for. My team will be stationed in a van on Wacker Drive. You go in, you access the terminal on 14, you plug in the drive. He handed me something that looked like an ordinary USB drive, but presumably was not ordinary in any way that mattered, and you let it run 60 seconds, maybe 90, then you walk out. And Dennis, I said, the guard, the man who laughed at me this morning. Dennis clocks out at 6. The evening guard is a man named Paul. Paul has been fully briefed. He'll let you through without logging the visit. You have the evening guard. We've been planning this for a while, Mr. Calloway. Clearly, I said, you just needed a husband. He didn't argue with that. I went home that afternoon and I sat in my kitchen, the kitchen I had repainted while Rebecca was supposedly in Boston. And I did something I hadn't done in a very long time. I just sat. No phone, no television, no noise, just me and the hum of the refrigerator and the faint smell of the paint that was still 18 months later slightly too yellow. Rebecca had told me she loved it. She'd kissed me on the cheek when she came home from her fake conference and said, Martins, it's perfect. I wondered, sitting there, how many things she'd said to me that were perfect lies. Then I stopped wondering, because that particular road had no good ending, and I needed to be functional in approximately 4 hours. At 5:30 I put on the jacket, not the one with the mustard stain, a better one, because if I was going to walk into my wife's building to steal evidence against her for the FBI, I was going to do it looking like I belonged there. I put the earpiece in. Calloway, Rohr's voice came through clean and low. You good? But let's go. The lobby of Callaway Vance at 7:40 in the evening is a different animal entirely from the marble-floored, soft jazz-playing, soul-departing experience of the daytime. At night it was quiet, minimal lighting, the front desk staffed by a single guard. Paul, true to Roar's word, a compact man in his 50s with tired eyes and the energy of someone who had been asked to do something uncomfortable and had decided the best strategy was to pretend it was completely normal. He looked at me as I walked in, nodded once, pressed a button under the desk. The turnstile clicked open. We didn't speak a single word to each other, and it was genuinely the most professional interaction I had ever had with another human being. The elevator to 14 was in a secondary bank at the back of the lobby, accessible only with a keycard. Roar had handled that too. The card was in my jacket pocket, slim and white, and completely unmarked. I pressed it to the reader. The light went green. The doors opened smooth. So far, Roar said in my ear. Don't, I told him. Don't what? Don't say it's going smoothly. That is the single most effective way to guarantee that something immediately goes wrong. Haven't you ever watched a movie? A pause. Just get to 14, he said. The 14th floor was dark, except for the ambient glow of standby monitors and the pale blue light of the emergency exit signs, casting everything in a color that felt aggressively cinematic. The server room was at the end of a hallway lined with glass-walled offices, each one empty, each one reflecting my own silhouette back at me as I walked past. I want to tell you I was calm. I want to tell you I moved with the easy confidence of a man who had done this sort of thing before. What I will tell you is that I was breathing like a man who had forgotten breathing was supposed to be automatic, and that I said a word under my breath, at least twice, that I will not repeat, because my mother raised me better. The server room door had a keypad. Roar read me the code, 6 digits. I punched them in. The lock disengaged with a sound like a sigh. Inside was cold, the kind of cold that hits you in the chest. Deliberate maintained the temperature of serious machinery. Rows of servers blinked steadily in the dark, patient and indifferent. And at the far end was the terminal Roar had described, a standalone unit, no network cable, air-gapped, which in FBI terms apparently meant the thing we really want, cannot legally touch. I crossed the room, sat down at the terminal, woke the screen. Drive in, Roar said. Left port. I plugged it in. The screen flickered. A progress bar appeared, pale against the dark interface, and began to move with the agonizing slowness of every progress bar in the history of humanity. 12%, 20 Roar, I said quietly. Yeah, if this works, if you get what you need, what happens to her? A beat. That's not really my... I know, it's not your department, I said. I'm not asking you officially. I'm asking you as the man who has been pretending to be her husband for 22 months. You know her. What happens to Rebecca? The progress bar hit 43%. He was quiet long enough that I thought he wasn't going to answer. She's smart, he finally said. Smart enough that her lawyers will try to position her as a secondary actor. Someone who is coerced, leveraged into cooperation. Whether that works, he paused, depends on what's on that drive. Meaning if she knew exactly what she was doing, then no amount of smart lawyers changes the math. 61%. I stared at the progress bar, and I thought about Rebecca at 29, standing in our apartment with a pitch deck spread across the kitchen table, talking at a speed that made it difficult to track individual sentences. Her eyes lit up with something I had never seen in another person before or since. Pure, undiluted belief in something she was building. I had fallen in love with her in that exact moment. Not before that moment, specifically the kitchen table, the pitch deck, the eyes. I wondered when that woman had become this one. I wondered if they were ever really different women at all, or if I had simply only ever seen the parts she'd chosen to show me. 78%. And then the lights came on, every single light on the 14th floor all at once, bright and sudden and absolutely catastrophic. Roar, I started. I see it, he said, and his voice had changed. The careful, measured cadence was gone. Someone triggered the building's internal security override. Callaway, that drive needs to finish. How long? 40 seconds, maybe 50. Someone's in the building, I said. Yes, someone who isn't supposed to be here. Yes, is it her? The longest pause of my entire life. No, he said. Rebecca's tracker shows her at the Langham. It's not her. Then who? Victor Hale's car was picked up on traffic cameras 4 blocks east 11 minutes ago. We didn't. A sound on his end, muffled, urgent. We didn't know he had access to the building. We're moving now, but Calloway, you need to stay at that terminal. 91%. I want to tell you that the sound I heard in the hallway outside the server room door was subtle. A footstep. Maybe a careful man moving carefully. The kind of sound you only catch if you're already frightened, and your senses have been dialed up past their normal range by a situation your body correctly identifies as dangerous. It was not subtle. It was the deliberate, unhurried sound of someone who knew exactly where they were going and had absolutely no reason to rush, which in my experience is significantly more terrifying than someone running. Running means panic. Running means improvisation. Slow and steady means the person already knows how this ends. 96%. The door handle moved. Roar, I said very quietly. 20 seconds, he said. We're at the building. 20 seconds. 98%. The door opened. Victor Hale was not what I expected. I don't know what I expected. Something villainous, I suppose. Something that announced itself. He was instead a man of about 60, medium height, silver-haired, wearing a coat that cost more than my truck. He looked standing in the doorway of that server room, like someone's distinguished grandfather, except for the eyes. The eyes were the eyes of a man who had made a significant number of decisions in his life and felt at most administrative regret about any of them. He looked at me, he looked at the terminal, he looked at the drive. 99%, Mr. Calloway, he said. His voice was pleasant, conversational. The voice of a man ordering wine at a restaurant, not the voice of a man who had just walked in on someone stealing evidence that would dismantle everything he'd spent 4 years building. I've been curious about you. Funny, I said. I've only known you existed for about 8 hours. He smiled. It didn't reach the eyes. Nothing reached the eyes. You should take that out, he said, nodding at the drive, and give it to me, and we can have a conversation about how this doesn't need to be any more complicated than it already is. 100%. The drive ejected with a soft click. I pulled it from the port. Here's the thing, Victor, I said, standing up slowly, the drive in my closed fist, my heart doing something medically inadvisable inside my chest. I'm not actually a complicated man. I drive a dented truck. I repaint kitchens. I bring my wife Thai food on Tuesdays. I paused, or I used to. He took one step into the room. The stairwell door at the end of the hallway exploded open. FBI, nobody move. Roar came through the door with 2 agents behind him, and the server room filled very suddenly with flashlights and shouting, and the specific organized chaos of people who have trained for exactly this moment. Finally getting to do the thing they've been waiting 22 months to do. Victor Hale looked at me one last time. What was underneath it was not pleasant at all. They took him in the hallway. It was efficient and fast, and nothing like the movies, which is somehow both disappointing and deeply reassuring. Roar appeared in the doorway of the server room, breathing harder than a federal agent was probably supposed to admit to, and looked at my closed fist. Tell me you held on to it, he said. I opened my hand. The drive sat in my palm, small and white and unremarkable, the most expensive thing I'd ever held. He let out a breath. You did good, Calloway. He said, I want that transfer record expunged. I said my name, my account, all of it. I want it gone, done, and I want to know what's on this drive before she does, before anyone does. I want to know who she actually is. He looked at me for a long moment, something in his face that was this time unambiguously close to sympathy. You sure about that? He said. I thought about the kitchen table, the pitch deck, the eyes. No, I said honestly, but tell me anyway. They told me 3 days later in a conference room with bad coffee and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly guilty, regardless of what they'd done. The drive contained everything. 4 years of authorization records, transfer approvals, internal communications. Rebecca had not been coerced. She had walked into the arrangement with Victor Hale at the very beginning, when Calloway Vance was still 18 months from profitability, and she had needed capital she couldn't source legitimately. She had made a choice, and then she had made $47 million worth of additional choices to protect the first one. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, she had married me, and I had painted the kitchen and learned her coffee order and driven across town with Thai food on a Tuesday, and I had been in the architecture of her life, a useful piece of furniture, A normal husband for an abnormal life. A story she could tell. Collateral just like I feared. She was arrested on a Thursday morning. I wasn't there. I didn't want to be. Roar offered, but I told him no. There are things you don't need to see. Things that won't make you feel better. And watching them put handcuffs on the woman you loved is one of them. I drove instead. No destination. Just Chicago moving past the windows of my dented Ford F-150. Loud and indifferent as always. My phone rang at some point. I didn't answer. At a red light somewhere on the north side, I looked at the passenger seat where the bag of Thai food had sat 2 days ago, cold and untouched, while I agreed to walk into a burning building for the FBI. The light turned green. I drove, and somewhere behind me, in a city that was already moving on to its next story, the woman I had loved was learning that the most dangerous thing about building a life on secrets isn't getting caught. It's realizing that somewhere along the way, between the lies and the laundering and the carefully constructed contingencies, there had been one thing that was real. And she had spent 2 years building a trap door underneath it. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of this sphere.